Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently we are in Isaiah chapter 40. We're going to pick it up at verse 11, and let's get to it. Now these chapters here, we left off at verse 10 when it says here, "See, the Lord comes with strength, and his power establishes his rule. His reward is with him, and his gifts accompanying him." So I'm just going to reiterate that we see over and over again the second coming of the Lord plainly stated. We also know what's going to happen when he comes. So verse 11 says, he protects his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lamb in his arms, and he carries them in the fold of his garment. He gently leads those that are nursing. So if you ever wonder why you see those artists renderings of Jesus, holding a staff or holding a lamb, well, okay. Verse 12, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens with the span of his hand? Now, it'd be like this, right? And then, or taking the dust. Who has gathered the dust of the earth in a measure, or weighed the mountains in a balance, and the hills in the scales? Now, this is what's called, and we're going to see a lot of this. We have seen it, but we're really going to see a lot of this imagery. In theological terms, it is called anthropomorphic, okay? Anthropomorphic, meaning that you're using physical attributes to describe God. And you kind of have to remember that even today, by today's standards, God would still think of us as children. When you compare what we know, now we think we know things. Our knowledge, the jump in our knowledge with technology, science, things like that, is only within the last, say, 200 years, right? In other words, if you go back in time, all of that time, man really, from a knowledge standpoint, was kind of in the dark. Now, when you compare that to today, we still are. In other words, we still don't know a lot of things. We can, for example, let's take the evolutionary debate. They would deny that God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, so if you go with that, so if you say God doesn't exist, so you start with that premise, God doesn't exist. So then you got to say, well then, how then does all of this exist? And my questions always is, why does it exist? Now, here's where the foolishness of man comes in, that because, in my opinion, they kind of make up stuff. So if you say you go back 14 billion years and you say a bang happened, okay, you can't prove that, even though the people will try to say that they can prove it. But you really can't prove it. And there are a lot of other avenues. Now, so let me express my ignorance, my level of ignorance. I'm not a scientist. I cannot, if I was in the room with one of the most famous astrophysicists, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I wouldn't have this conversation with him. Right? I would not have and I also would say this, I do not think that the Bible here, and as we look at this, the Bible is not a scientific book. In other words, I believe the claims of the Bible. I believe them. Now, I don't believe the claims of evolution. Now, so but if you gotta go back to in modern day how they arrive at, or some of the knowledge that they stand on, I'm not qualified to have that debate or discussion. I don't know. What I would say is, as I do listen to them, I can also say what they don't say. You know, there's a lot of we think, it may be, if, maybe, you know, there's a lot of that that's kind of peppered into their discussions. Why? Because they cannot give hard facts of what they don't know. And one of the things, and I want to say this, that I think that the wisdom of God kind of displayed in creation, right? You can almost say like a treasure hunt. You know, in the recent news, a lady found a box of treasures, and I think it was something like $25,000. So, with the treasure hunt, they gave her all kinds of clues. Now, without the clues, she never ever would have found the treasure. And I believe creation, what God has done in creation, has given clues. Now, there's another element that I'm not going to get into, and that is the sinful nature. No matter what clues you have, no matter what evidence you have, you know, there are atheists that no matter what evidence. In fact, I've listened to certain atheists that say that even if God was to appear to me, I still wouldn't follow him. And I think that that is one of the most accurate statements that they could have made, because the sinful nature there. But if you just want to go by evidence, if you want to go by just say, well, let's look at creation, and you want to say that God didn't create this, if you want to say God doesn't exist, so then you say natural processes to that. And that is one of the most illogical statements to me, because if you say natural processes, that I want to say, well, why? How, every other thing comes through logic. Like if this Apple Pen here, this Apple mouse here, this little remote. All of that is by design, that you could never logically say that it would naturally form. So then you come to life on the vastness of the universe. Even then, if you have an explosion, why would, as the result of the explosion, you have billions of galaxies in synchronous orbit, and that the orbits are not colliding with one another? In other words, do we ever seen where a galaxy, this galaxy, collides with this galaxy and cause another cosmic explosion? You know, in our own galaxy, you know, the 9 planets that don't collide with each other. And then you could say, why is that? Now, I don't have the answers. I'm going to be the first to say I don't have the answers. I'm also going to say they don't have the answers either. In other words, they don't have the answers. So then when you come back to the complexity of life, so now you start with an explosion, then you have galaxies that form, that have planets in the galaxies orbiting stars. Now, lifeless planet, so far as we can see. But let's just stick with our own galaxy, and we say, well, in our own galaxy, you got the sun and 9 planets, and only one of the planets have life. Right? In other words, so you got all the other planets that orbit, and then this one planet has life. And then now they're gonna, I think they say that the age of the Earth is probably around 4 million, I believe. The age of the universe, according to them, is 14 billion. And I say that if you give 120 trillion years, you still cannot get to this kind of complexity. You cannot logically say that just from that explosion would come this. Then on this planet, which is the only planet that looks like, right? In other words, if you see it from space, you see a blue ball, a blue circle, a blue sphere. And then If there were aliens, right, as they passing by and they looked down, like in the Star Trek series, that all of a sudden now there was something that attracted the Vulcans in here, and that the Vulcans now came and kind of introduced the human race to the um, um, galactic community, right? It's a made-up fantasy, right? It's a science fiction because in reality, there's no other signs of life in the universe. But um, when you think about the complexity of life here, that they want to say that they think it's perfectly logic to say that from an explosion comes order. The first order would be the order of the planet, and then the formation of the planet, the formation of life on the planet. Then I have to stop and think about it. Wait a minute, the formation of life? Really? Now, in some cases, you can say there was some water, right, floating through the universe and landed on the earth, and then all of a sudden germinated from that point. Then all of a sudden, from water germinated on life. Then all of a sudden, you get some bacteria, you get some whatever goo. But by the way, remember the Earth formed because it started from an explosion itself, right? It was kind of like a star or whatever, and then it cooled down, right? It cooled down, and then from all of that, then this life, this complexity of life started, right? Goo, then the goo formed into some amoebas, amoebas formed into some fish formed into some other kind of planets. Now, with all of that, how does life form in each stage? When you think about this body here, well, don't think about my body. I'm not the most handsomest man, okay? Picture Brad Pitt. All right, anyway, I digress. Why would it form two eyes, a nose, ears, smell, mouth? Why would it form that? Why would it form male and female? Why would it form sexual reproduction, the difference in male and female sexual organs to procreate life, right? Why would you have the complexity of birth within a woman and not in a man, right? I mean, we can really literally go on and on and on with just questions. Now, so when God speaks here, in verse 12, he says, he has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand. Now, he's speaking to us on a level that we can comprehend. Remember, it took thousands of years for man to get to the understanding of, in a sense, how the universe works, how the earth works, how the human body works. And yet we're still so far away, we can't really solve disease. Is it possible, given time, we could? Yeah, possible. But you just think about, just in the evolution of thought, man's thought, you have the majority of the history of man. Now watch this. No matter what time frame you put it on. In fact, the longer the time frame, it's even worse for man. So if you say that man has been on this planet, I don't know, for millions of years, then all of a sudden you look at millions of years, and then versus a lot of what's called the creationism, which is the biblical position. So they're going to say man is about 6,000 to 10,000 years, right? So either way. So if it's millions of years, you still got to say, well, why did it take millions of years for us to get to the, development, the intellectual development of now? If you look at, right, I mean, and in each step of the way, you have to kind of ask, well, why would man, why would it even develop that way? If I was to think, and I'm going to say this is just a hypothetical for the sake of, the discussion here. Let's say you start in New York City, so on the Atlantic coast, and you build a giant ramp, right? A giant ramp. I don't know how high it is, whatever, let's say 100 miles high, whatever, that would stretch from New York City to San Francisco. I believe that's the I-80, Interstate 80. I think Interstate 80 would goes from coast to coast that way. Okay. So anyway, from coast to coast. So however high this ramp take, you take a gigantic boulder, right? And you put it on top of that ramp, and then you push it, and it starts to roll, right? So however long it takes, it rolls from New York City all the way down to San Francisco. So how would that rock look at the end? Now, again, this is a very elementary comparison or analogy. I acknowledge that. But my point of view is, and let's say the rock was very rough, almost square, and if you can get that thing by gravity to pull it, right? Now, you could see at the end how it could be round, just boom, 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 if it's the rough edges or even square, that eventually it could, by friction, the law of friction, end up being a spear, a ball. You can see that by friction, right? Again, I realize this is very elementary. But could you then see that it would have legs, arms, eyes, nose, and then develop thought? Like from that, develop thought and then emotions, right? I acknowledge that's a very elementary. But my thing is, it is no more silly than to say that even if you start in the water, amoeba or something from the water, the origins of life, as atheistic scientists say. So going from one species, the development, the leap. So you start off with the amoeba. Is the amoeba male or female, or a blob of goo? So at this point, why would you develop in any species a male and female? So in this species, you evolve a male, and then in this species, you evolve a female with all of the parts inside. All of the parts inside. Then it jumps from another species to a lower primate, and then you have the same. So, except with this now, you got some eyes. So with apes, for example, we go from crawling on the ground to apes, right? The lower primate, apes. The apes don't have intelligence, rationality, right? But they got two eyes, they got a nose, they got heart, liver, they got respiratory, digestive, all of those things right here. Why? So then we jump from the apes to man. And they're saying this is a natural process. So where did the emotions come from? The thoughts, where did they come from? Now, I see these questions that I would have. I'm certainly not as educated to have that conversation, but in verse 12 here, God claims to make all of this. God claims to be the creator. And that is really my whole point to that. That God claims to be the creator. We're obviously going to pick this up in the next study. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.